All right, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are in the world. This is a truly global webinar. My name is Sophia Arend, and I am the Global Blockchain Business Council's Senior Analyst. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the GBBC Virtual Members Forum. This is a bi-weekly webinar series we are hosting showcasing the innovative work of our members around the world. And today we have the pleasure to be joined by Leanne Kemp. She is founder and CEO of Everledger in Queensland, chief entrepreneur, as well as GBBC Regional Ambassador to Australia. She will be presenting today on the rise of Web3 brands and the shift towards value and essentials. Just briefly before I'd like to begin, I'd like to introduce Leanne. So she's a prominent figure in the tech sector. She co-chairs the World Economics Forum's Global Future Council on the Future of Manufacturing and takes part in the Global Future Council on Blockchain. She also leads workstreams here with us at the GBBC and co-chairs the World Trade Board's Sustainable Trade Action Group and is on the IBM platform Board of Advisors. In 2018, her entrepreneurial successes saw her appointed as the Queensland Chief Entrepreneur, which I hope she'll tell us more about, where she develops the state's startup ecosystem, attracts investment, and supports job creation. She is also the first female entrepreneur to hold this position. Leanne, thanks so much for joining us, and to everyone listening, please submit your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom screen, and we'll take them at the end of Leanne's talk. So thank you so much. I will hand things over to Leanne.
Thanks, everyone. Big warm welcome here from sunny Queensland, which is about 9:30 at night, so no sunshine out of my window today. I guess everyone knows Everledger from the bold work that we began in the heart of London in 2015 in the diamond industry and producing a platform of provenance to enable traceability. But when I first envisaged the world and what was the very first iteration of Everledger, I remember so boldly saying that we were moving from what we once knew was the World Wide Web to the World Wide Ledger. And well, I guess it's happening. Today, we're speaking about Web3 or Web 3.0, and particularly as it pertains to the work that we've been doing. And no, it's not in the diamond industry. And if we take a step back to consider the evolution of the internet, we've had Web 1, whereas the Internet of Ideas, the glorified digital notice board that we can also brushly remember in the late 80s and early 90s. And then, of course, we have Web 2, the Internet of Commerce. If you want it, you can find it, and of course, you can buy it. And now there's Web 3, the Internet of Brand, in a world where everything is available and your choices is what matters. Web 3 is collaborative, open, and is led by consumers, where you can choose your own adventure. The internet is evolving and we're co-evolving with it. The internet is an all-persuasive, it's no longer a question, and the genie itself cannot be put back in the bottle. So now is the time to consider how we best use it. Everledger, of course, we began with diamonds, but our vision was so much bigger. And last month we announced with Alexander McQueen the MyMCQ launch. It was a collaboration between the iconic fashion brand and Everledger. It was a proud moment, as you can imagine, the end, or should I say the beginning of a vision that started so very long ago for us. The idea is the creator and the consumer would be able to authenticate and track the provenance of bespoke fashion garments created by this brand in a collective collaboration style. And what's more, you could literally wear your brand on the sleeve through smart enablement of NFC and show the story of the clothing. But the big question that was really asked was, how can we enable the legacy fashion brands win over the millennials and the Gen Z consumers or the Gen Z consumers? Today's generation of millennials and Gen Z consumers are particularly suspicious regarding supply chains of fashion brands. And they want to be assured that items that they love are what they think they are, not only beautiful, but socially and environmentally responsible. So millennials and the Generation Z are definitely not consumer groups that brands can afford to alienate. They're probably going to be the largest spender in the future, $200 billion in spending power in the US alone. And it's expected to rise over the coming years. Generation Z are the first generation of true digital natives. They're already made up of 20% of the population in Brazil, and they'll represent about 25% of the population in Asia in 2025, the same as millennials. And the members of Gen Z are huge on sharing information. They grew up in an age of social media and sharing news across social platforms that was just natural to them. They pretty much were born with a device in their hand. They are seeking the search for truth at the root of all Gen Z behaviours. We're very inquisitive, and here I am clustering myself in my customer demographic, and certainly they like to make decisions rooted in information. Now, when we started on this journey, we imagined not only traceability, but also how can we bring together more enriched data around people and planet, this stakeholder view of value that's created from a supply chain. Sustainability and social issues are very important to consumers, and so many new brands are beginning to become more transparent about their business practices. Sustainable companies are advancing with new material science, and some fashion brands produce their fabrics out of recycled water bottles. Secondhand merchants on peer-to-peer websites are popular amongst really young consumers who are ethically shopping, and they want to protect the environment for these non-biodegradable clothing and fast fashion brands. So there was a genius, in fact, a guy called Brian Eno, who coined Sensius, which is the genius that was created by a certain scene or a group of people. And when we first came across this underpins the principle of the work that we've done with Everledger and Alexander McQueen. He defined that the intelligence and the intuition of a whole cultural scene is communal in its form and actually can perform the concept of genius. Now, how can we apply that? The principles of a collector in art, of the artist itself, and how can we bring that into a fashion brand? Now, Sensius can occur anywhere where minds meet, whether it be a town, a company, a region, or a virtual space. It tends to have this subversive quality to it, and some of the most lasting and influential cultural movements have happened without permission or broad market appeal. It's often this subversion to the status quo that's the core driver to their success. Now, over 2 millennia, the rich and powerful have bankrolled cultural production and reaped the benefits in many cases. Artists were placed in a precarious position, subject to the whims and sensitivities of their patrons. Galileo, the father of modern astronomy, was abandoned and betrayed by Medicis. And when faced with the charges of their discoveries, was out later, died under the house arrest. Now, the principles of this for us to say, how can we bring the industry gatekeepers to one side, and whilst they played a vital role in the artists themselves, how do we bring a connected world together and integrate that across the technology backbone of not just only blockchain, machine vision, RFID, and also enable the internet and the World Wide Web to bring together an entirely new set of value creation. So Web3 is the rise of exactly as I just spoke, with creative industries and the redefinition of artistic patronage. And what's really interesting is to retain market share with a growing and influential demographic, fashion brands need to be able to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that they're ethical. And this is where blockchain comes to play. Any suspicions amongst millennial consumers will quickly see them turn to competitors and potentially cause significant financial and reputational damage. Now, blockchain technology offers a solution to this challenge, yes, but it must come in consortium with other technologies, particularly NFC, near-field communication, tags, Internet of Things, and it will provide an indisputable record of truth that is uniquely capable of showing millennials, these new customers with a huge billion-dollar spend, that goods that they buy benefit everyone involved in their production. Now, over the last few years, it's become clear to business in all industries that modern consumers are increasingly drawn to ethical brands. And compared to previous generations, millennials are way more sensitive to how their clothes and accessories are being made, and they simply won't stand for nefarious practices such as exploiting working conditions or unsustainable production processes. Now, this heightened awareness of social and environmental issues is reflected in where they spend their money. A third of the global consumers have expanded their scope of purchasing decisions over the last 3 years to incorporate principled values and views. And so therefore, the burden of evidence is with manufacturers to evidence, not just say that their operations conform to the highest ethical standards, but these customers, the millennials and the Gen Zs, they want to know that workers are being properly compensated, that raw materials have sourced sustainably, that brands are proactively taking steps to minimize their environmental footprint by reducing waste and cutting down on CO2 emissions. Now, you would have heard many times about the talk of circular economy, and it's not just about sustainability and ethics that's within fashion brands that we all have to think about. Fraud is also a prominent issue, particularly in luxury goods where counterfeit is rife. And for example, the Global Brand Counterfeiting Report, which was recently published, estimated that nearly $100 billion is highlighted in just how effective counterfeiting has become. $100 billion industry is knocking on the doorsteps of the concerns of many fashion houses. Now, although dealing with knockoffs isn't anything new for the global fashion industry, but counterfeiting operations have become so sophisticated that they now threaten the integrity of the original high-end fashion brand. And knockoffs are harder to spot than ever before, which means that fashion brands have to find a way to reassure customers what they're buying is genuine. The most successful fashion brands, of which we're working with, will become the ones that are able to build trust amongst these new consumers and differentiate themselves through ethics and sustainability. And this is clearly where blockchain and multiple technologies play a role. Today's forward-thinking fashion brands have an opportunity to win over customers by leveraging the likes of blockchain, NFC, IoT to play a part in displaying provenance, improve traceability, and demonstrate their commitment to ethics and sustainability. These combination of technologies will provide a unique identity that can accurately and indisputably record a product's origin and history. Now, by fitting garments with NFC tags and using blockchain to seamlessly record all activities related to these garments on an immutable ledger, fashion brands will be able to build a secure and permanent record of each and every clothing item. Customers will have access to the lifetime history of the product, including when and where it was designed, from where raw materials were sourced, whether it's been previously owned before they even make a purchase. And this provides a whole new level of transparency in the brand's ethical and sustainable business practices, enabling them to bring trust to the consumer and build it with the consumer at the same time as combating counterfeit. It's also going to provide a completely new customer experience, which is where the offering of Alexander McQueen or the MCQ brand has really eclipsed many others in the market. Equipping with authenticity that blockchain enables, millennials and the Gen Z customers can buy items safely in the knowledge that they're contributing to the brand that meets their standards, related to factors such as ethical sourcing, sustainability, and workers' rights. And in an age where consumer demands are high than ever before and brand loyalty can be hard to come by, being able to present a reliable information source about a product's history and characteristics offers a vital differentiator. And by providing unparalleled level of transparency and traceability, blockchain technology can help to provide fashion brands build trust and endear themselves to today's consumers. I'm super looking forward to the next step as we start to bring not only technology to the forefront of consumer interactions, but also the consciousness of mind. Those questions that you silently ask yourself that you're never able to seek the answers for are now driven from the product itself. Finally, we will see not only the internet move from what we once knew was the World Wide Web to the World Wide Ledger, but we will also see financial institutions look at concepts move beyond KYC, not just only knowing your customer, but also knowing your object. And finally, there is a place in the world where those questions can be answered. Not only where does it come from, but also where does it go after it leaves me? That concept of circular economy, hopefully by 2030, we won't be speaking about it because it purely will be the economy. So I might leave it there. I know that there'll be questions flowing, and hopefully that's touched on some of the sound bites that are interesting to everyone. The rise of Web3 and brands, where provenance is embedded within smart objects, where consumers have a consciousness around their purchasing habits, and where transparency and circular economy is just the economy and the way we trade.
Thanks so much, Leanne. Much appreciated. And yes, we have a few questions coming in. So someone says, yay, Leanne, thank you for joining us. Can you please talk about upcycling and how we can better recycle/reuse to ultimately create less waste or use that waste?
Yeah, look, I mean, being Queensland's chief entrepreneur here, I'm ultimately connected to most of our incredible scientists. And I think there's two parts to upcycling or reusing supply chains to underpin circular economy. First, there's a mass movement in material science. And certainly Everledger has embarked upon a number of very quiet projects here in Australia around the tracking and tracing and repurposing of plastics, tyres of cars that can be repurposed into flaking down and repurposed into roads as a prime example, and also aluminium and green aluminium. Now, what's really interesting is less about the traceability, to be honest, and more about the material science, because often when you have to go through a refining process, the quality of that commodity changes. And so how can you bring about entirely new material science layers? So it's not just about the traceability, but certainly those single-use plastics, the Mount Franklin water bottles that you see scattered in rivers around the world. Can we actually bring together a better form of science and repurpose that material into, say, construction grade material that could be reused for retaining walls or even parts of furniture in housing? And I think that's well underway. The principles of circular economy are also being deployed now by large retail outlets. One of the largest in the world is IKEA. And what we're seeing is those closed loop return systems. It was here in Australia just this week that Duracell, one of the largest battery suppliers in the world, also have putting together stewardship schemes to say, return the waste to us and we will then take care of it. But in the same instance, we're seeing Apple sue massive companies that were responsible for the destruction of their waste, and they've been selling it on. So I do think traceability plays a big role, but for us to really gain access to that value chain out of urban mining instead of natural mining, we're going to need better forms of material science coming to the forefront.
Absolutely. Let's see here, question. I'm very interested. Okay. We had someone come in with a question specifically about investing. They say, I'm very interested in having pension fund investments linked to participant purposes so that their money is invested according to the beliefs. Do you envision a way of doing this, or perhaps a better way of doing this?
Yeah, so I think what's fantastic about the time that we're in today is, of course, before COVID hit, there was the rise of climate justice. And we also saw BlackRock making some pretty big commitments around where they're investing money. And that was a huge market signal towards impact. But we've also seen different ways upon which social enterprises are rising in the world. So profit for purpose entities. I think it's largely understood now that we are driving fast towards the reduction of focusing in shareholder value and moving to stakeholder value. And I think blockchain plays a huge role in the ability to understand where those funds go and for what purpose. So give back schemes will start to become the norm, where you may purchase an item and that item might be linked to a small artisanal emerging market like Tanzania as a prime example. And the cause of that profit might go back into building infrastructure. And we don't necessarily have visible technologies today or platforms being built today that drive that at a production level. We've certainly seen small POCs in place, but not really at a point of enterprise level. I think many investors are asking for this, and financial markets are definitely moving towards it. And the faster that we can get there and link them into 2030 for the Sustainable Development Goals and link those into those 17 SDGs, I think the more rapid governments will even pick up supporting policy around this. And at the moment, I think that's falling short, because we certainly need more work in the SDGs. We need to put our shoulders to the wheel on giving definitions at a data level about what SDG 8 really means and get measuring. If you can't measure it, how can you solve it?
Absolutely. This actually, somebody asked a question, I think building off of this question about investing, and they said, is this also about shifting towards focusing more on longer term returns rather than short term? Do people need to have a more future looking perspective on their investments in order for this to take hold? Or
look, I think, what is longer term? The reality of the moment is that scientists have given us until 2030 to solve for some of the rising concerns in climate and environment. So we're no longer sitting in the year 2000 contemplating what the next 30 years looks like. We've turned a new decade. The clocks are moving faster than ever before in such a compressed state. And in such a fragmented world. I think when we talk about long term, the longest term view that we should be taking is 10 years, and 10 years is actually not that far away. So I do think the currency of time is changing in quite a rapid pace. And so, no, we don't have time to wait. But I do think technologies like blockchain are still quite embryonic. And so we need to be able to solve for some of those grander technical challenges around interoperability, bringing to the forefront parts of those combinations of technologies and coupling up in far greater speed than ever before, embedding protocols with the W3C so that we can enable at a protocol level this to become the worldwide ledger and bring Web3 to the forefront. So I don't think that we should be thinking about a 50-year horizon. I think it's, 10 years is the very longest we should be thinking.
I think somebody else asked also, I think you talked about Gen Z and now a little bit about government. In order for this to happen in the next 10 years in this new time frame that we need to think about, is it the consumers that are going to push this forward? Is it governments, or is it both? And if so, can you talk a little bit about what you've seen in government or maybe regulations that have really fostered innovation and allowed this ecosystem to flourish?
Yeah, so I think it's both. The reality is that we move when there's a crisis, or we move when there's demand-driven need. And I certainly think the rising consumer spending power of millennials and the consciousness around the questions they're asking now will drive that demand in far greater ways than ever before. From a government perspective, I mean, everyone knows and understands many governments have supported and continuously support innovation and entrepreneurship. And there's probably not a country in the world that doesn't have a co-working space that exists, or some type of incubator or accelerator program. What I think will actually change the dial are parts of the economic drivers around policy. And I do remember being in Davos a number of years ago and meeting the Federal Minister for Circular Economy for China. And it was at a time when the paper was writing about China closing its borders to waste. And really no one was speaking about a federal minister being appointed to the circular economy. And in circular economy in 2016 was rather principally driven based on white papers. It was theorized. But then we started to see governments take policy positioning, appointing ministers, because they understood there's an economics to these principles. And I think we've been talking about climate, environment, and sustainability for many, many decades. We've got incredible Netflix movies and blockbusters that have run from even previous vice presidents, Al Gore. But there hasn't been an economic model to make that vehicle move forward. And it's the circular economy is the economic model that underpins this. So you need to have economic drivers, and you do definitely need to ensure that those economic drivers are meeting the value and the values of the generation that is creating demand or off-taking demand. And that is the millennials and the Gen Zs, who have a voice now that's rising, that mightn't have the power of the spend today, but the ticking of the clock is coming very quickly, and that money will actually turn heads and turn entire supply chains in different directions.
When you say demand, I mean, I wonder what effects has the COVID-19 pandemic had on these shifts that are taking place?
Massive shifts.
Accelerant.
I'd like to say they're tectonic. I mean, they are really tectonic plate shifts. So I think, you know, the macro trends that have happened with COVID, of course, has been huge digital transformation. And that's undeniable, whether it's, you know, broadcasting on Zoom or distributed in terms of workforce. And many companies that have worked in blockchain, that has been our status quo. So I feel as though the future has been brought forward to where we were always imagining it to be. Physical supply chains have been compromised, and I think that's a very interesting place to look. There's probably not a minister, prime minister, or president in the world that isn't concerned for nationalisation or sovereignty of supply chains right now. And there are defence-like discussions underway in enabling security of supply chains, whether that be food or PPE in the height of the concern of the health pandemic. But there's also worries about ensuring that they can bring manufacturing back. So how do they actually enable just-in-time manufacturing, where typically those industries had gone offshore? And so how do you reshore? And that's huge opportunities for technology companies like us, because there hasn't necessarily been a real focus in that environment. When we think about the rise of large giants from a tech perspective, there's been a lot in fintech, a lot in social media, but there hasn't really been a lot of MRP or ERP rising of technology giants. There has been a number of decades ago with SAP as a prime example, but outside of SAP and maybe Salesforce, I can't really point my finger to too many others that have disrupted that space. And it's time to do that, particularly if you think about object level traceability at a point where we're underpinning the risk mechanisms of an entire supply chain, or we're driving entirely new value chains. And I think that's what the big opportunity holds for COVID.
Absolutely. Could you speak a little bit about how you see things? You wear your Everledger hat as an entrepreneur, you know, a founder in tech, and then as Queensland Chief Entrepreneur. Can you walk us through a little bit your role as Queensland Chief Entrepreneur and how you view this both taking place in Queensland and your role in that as?
So I don't know too many government appointed chief entrepreneurs in the world, to be honest. And certainly Queensland created the Office of Chief Entrepreneur 4 years ago. And it was 5 years ago that they created Advance Queensland, which is effectively sits under the Minister for Innovation. And now it's afforded in the state of Queensland $755 million in innovation funding to support entrepreneurs, startups, scale-ups, universities, so research fellowships, and those funds are either creating physical infrastructure, so places and spaces where entrepreneurs can live and work, and then also enables grant enablement programs. Now, government is government, and they speak a certain language, and some of them are career government officials and politicians. Entrepreneurs are somewhat of a different breed, and in fact, it was quite ironic when I first became Queensland's chief entrepreneur. I felt like we were this David Attenborough type movie where governments or corporates walked into the room and said, look at those entrepreneurs, you know, foraging for cold pizza, and wait, you know, here comes the corporate. And I thought, this is very strange. Like, why are we so separated? I mean, the reality is entrepreneurs are small business creators, and we build corporations, and we're solving for problems. And maybe we explain things in different ways. Maybe even the way we run businesses are slightly different. And in fact, I write about this in my office, that, you know, we have many corporates that have perfected the art of managerial logic, but great scale-ups and entrepreneurs have an innovation logic where we understand the importance of experimental activity, that we have multiple complex environments that we have to solve. We seek certainty in uncertainty, all these things that are very foreign. Failure is success for us. Like, we love to be epic losers because we want to be experimental in getting it right. Imagine going to your boss if you're in a corporate and say, I keep failing every day. Likely is you're probably going to be fired or demoted. So I think there's a very different language and a taxonomy that is driven from entrepreneurship. And so they created the Office of Queensland Chief Entrepreneur to help bridge that understanding, but also to showcase someone who's been there before, and someone who has that lived experience that can help with the knowledge base. And now we've had another state in Australia called South Australia, who has followed in the Office of Chief Entrepreneur. And I know there are a number of other countries in the world that are also entertaining a very similar role. So let's hope. I also said, I think every company needs a chief entrepreneur, not answering to the CEO, but sitting next to the CEO. Because of course, the CEO of organization, particularly in a time of COVID, are embedded in the current state, right? There's so much legacy involved. What if you were to take a really ambitious and constantly bring disruption to yourself, constantly bring an existential crisis to the corporation? And I guess you'll start to see that rising in a time of concern, but maybe that would have prevented the likes of a Kodak if they had a chief entrepreneur sitting next to the CEO.
Perhaps. That's definitely something to think about. And as you said, I can only hope that we see more governments take the lead and create offices like the chief entrepreneur of their state. I mean, somebody chatted me, and I think this is a good question to kind of perhaps end on or get to thinking. What's next for Everledger? You've done diamonds, wine, fashion. What's next on the horizon? Think big. I know you always do. So people, I think, can only imagine what industry you'll be in next, or what you're excited about moving into.
I mean, I did say at one point in time, you know, Amazon started with books and we started with diamonds, and our vision is so much bigger. And in fact, I remember that pitch day at Techstars in London in 2015, and looking back on it now, we followed that pathway of the vision. I guess we're probably one of a handful of companies that started blockchain in 2015 and have not pivoted. We've stuck really to our game, and we do that well. I have a very firm belief in a number of things that are tectonic plates shifting right now. Supply chains will move to value chains. That natural mining, digging up the earth, is limited in its life, and we will move to an equilibrium between natural mining and urban mining. We will start to think not about waste as waste, we'll think about it as value. We won't see this mobile phone as something we throw away. We'll see this as something that we mine. And in top of that, this new sense of data that links provenance and sustainability and object-driven value is critical to not just only the supply chain itself, but the risk chain that sits over the top of it. So, you know, banks will start to ask big questions about not just the company that they're funding, but what is the object that is being produced and in what state. And so too will insurance companies. So for us, we're firm on the prize, looking at not just only provenance from the source of where it's come from, but also where does it go to after it leaves me. Circular economy, I think we're going to nail that.
I'm excited to watch it. I mean, it's already taking place. It's just a matter of proliferation and it becoming the norm. That's what, yeah. Leanne, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a true pleasure to hear you and to be able to ask you questions. And I think the same for our audience. We will share resources for folks to learn more about Everledger and truly the catalog of solutions, services, and the industries you're working in. So, and a recording to this as well for those who weren't able to tune in live. I think we have one more question come in. Here we go. I think this is a great one to end on. It says, training next generations is important. So how do we train the older generations for this digital economy? We're talking about
I love that you asked this question, because I have a podcast called Unkempt, and go search for it. In fact, my niece was pretty excited. She thought I had a TikTok account and that I was on Spotify because I knew how to sing, but she was very disappointed that what I have on Spotify is a podcast and all she hears is me talking. Take a look at it. So I've interviewed a number of people in my role as Queensland's chief entrepreneur, but also at the very end, I do about 3-minute called Leanne Splaining, because let's face it, I get mansplained every day, whether it's about tell me about blockchain and I get told what blockchain is. So I do a Leanne splaining session for everyone, and I talk about this exact topic, intergenerational weaving. It is so critically important. And in fact, we support a number of programs across Queensland looking at what we had was men's sheds. They were sheds where the older generation went and started tinkering. And it was typically a shed that was created to help with men and mental health. And I said, but why wouldn't we bring the younger kids together with the older generation and bring them together and start thinking about things on the farms, as a prime example, farmpreneurs. So it is intergenerational weaving. It's something that's critically important. My head of R&D at Everledger was Earl, and he's 77 years of age. Now, we work with the Turing Institute in London and have some of the best cryptographers that are fresh out of university and some of the best doctorates and professors. And when I'm, sitting with our team, our young, incredible team that are ridiculously bright, we brought together the older generation so that we knew that we could place that technology in situ right in the hands of industry. So 50 years of experience working in various forms of technology is Earl, and particularly in RFID technology. And so we knew that if we brought together someone with that much knowledge with the younger generation, we'd get it right first time. And look, we did.
Absolutely. I love that. And somebody said, oh my goodness, Leanne, is that not the best? You tell those mansplainers. I love the mansplaining. Absolutely. We will certainly, and now that you've mentioned that on the podcast, we will circulate a link to that as well for those who haven't already seen it on Spotify. That's brilliant, Leanne splaining. Who knew that there were man sheds? Thank you so much. Just before we wrap up, if you have any final thoughts, please leave them here with us. We'd love to hear them.
Well, I don't know what my final thoughts could be, but certainly it's a critical time for everyone that's working in this technology space. And I think it's the right time for us to step into the moment, and don't be afraid of it. There are huge changes underfoot, not just only in digital transformation, but all of the supply chains are rethinking how they're going about creating the attention of the market and demand-driven activities. And I think it's the right time for us to really go front and center. It's fantastic. I'm pretty pumped for it, and I'm looking forward to what the next 10 years holds.
Thanks so much. Much appreciated. Like I said, we'll circulate this webinar and the links, and we so look forward to seeing what Everledger is doing. And I think I heard that that's a call to action for all of us. So,
no worries. See you later, everyone. Take it easy. Be safe.